Malta, World War II. Now there are two words you've never put together in a sentence. The now Republic of Malta is an island in the Mediterranean Sea, having been ruled by the Romans, French, English, and more in its 6,000-year history. Despite seeing many conflicts and wars during this period, none were quite like the ones seen in the Second World War. Where was Malta, and why was it so important? Malta's strategic position in the Mediterranean Sea was the sole reason the island was so sought over, and this wasn't any different in World War II. Prior to 1939, Malta was used as an overseas fortress for the British Army and Navy. The British fortified as much as they could for such an indefensible island such as Malta, since they could not afford to lose their only base between Gibraltar and Egypt, which was vital for the bit of control in the Gibraltar Strait and Suez Canal. Come June 1940, Malta was in the middle of a conflict between the Allies and Axis, and due to Malta being owned by Britain, there was no escaping what looked to be destruction and ruin for Malta and its people. Italy versus Britain, July 1939 to January 1941. With Italy taking primary control in southern Europe and northern Africa, whilst the Germans were conquering Europe, strengthening the Mediterranean and its islands was a priority. The Italian and British surface fleets were evenly matched, but the Italians made use of their home advantage and gained initial air superiority and outnumbered Britain underwater. More anti-aircraft and fighter aircrafts were brought to defend Malta in July 1939. After the fall of France in May 1940 and fear of the home islands in danger, Winston Churchill decided to pull all forces from Malta aside from 6 obsolete biplanes. Following the British retreat in the Mediterranean, Italy declared war on Britain and their allies. Italy's plan of expansion was made easier after the defeat of France at the hands of Germany. It meant they didn't have to deal with the French Navy, which was heavily set up in the region. With Mussolini's Italy controlling both navy and air warfare, an offensive was called which included the bombing of what was an almost defenseless Malta. 142 bombs were dropped on Malta during the first day, and without the infamous RAF to assist the defense, there was little hope. After many air raids across the country, Mussolini and the Italian admirals started a naval assault. Recent success led them to believe they could keep an old Royal Navy fleet bottled up in Alexandria, ultimately preventing them from defending strategic points such as the Suez Canal and Malta. Despite the many naval conflicts between the first and last time, the main Italian and British fleets engaged each other in the Battle of Calabria on July 9, 1940. This battle's outcome was inconclusive, with both sides claiming victory. However, the Maltese people's spirits were lifted as Britain displayed how strong their navy was despite being far from home. It also demonstrated Britain's support for Malta and other southern allies or territories. Following the failed Italian invasion of Egypt, which saw many air units pulled to northern Africa in a bid to save their assault, the Allies were now able to solely focus on an offensive instead of defensive operations. Thus, the British launched a relentless counter-offensive called Operation Compass. Operation Compass saw many battles and included the destruction of an Italian fleet in the Battle of Taranto. Swordfish torpedo bombers managed to disable a large amount of Italian heavy units. Meanwhile, Italy were losing a war on multiple fronts and were forced to withdraw the Italian fleet to Naples, handing naval supremacy to Britain. German intervention, January to April 1941. The success of the German army in Europe was a powerful and unpredictable show of strength. Since the Germans were overachieving, they had the same expectations for other members of the Axis, including Italy. Hitler didn't have much choice. Choosing not to help Mussolini would result in losing the oil fields in Arabia and the loss of a foothold in Africa. Erwin Rommel, who was one of Hitler's favored generals, was dispatched to Africa to launch Operation Sonnenblume in February 1941 in order to secure the Axis front. They then began a counteroffensive and drove the British back into Egypt. However, operating overseas in Africa meant most of the supplies to Axis forces would come via the sea. Ultimately, this made Malta a dangerous threat to the Axis logistical concerns. Air raids destroyed naval forces and RAF bases to hinder the passage of supplies into Malta. Britain also tried to intercept Axis supplies into Libya via the use of submarines, but failed on many occasions. The involvement of the Luftwaffe was crucial as the Allied pilots stationed on Malta weren't very experienced, and the Axis air supremacy above Malta wasn't their only place of success. The whole Mediterranean airspace was controlled by the Regia Aeronautica and Luftwaffe, totaling 42 air victories. A small number of inferior RAF Hurricanes arrived in Malta on the 18th of March 1941, but both the aircraft and pilots were reported lost shortly after. It wasn't until the Battle of the Tarago Convoy, led by Commander P.J. Max, 14th Destroyer Flotilla, the Allies found success by sinking a small Axis convoy. The following night, 3 Italian destroyers. German withdrawal and the resurgence of the Allies, April 1941. Hitler was forced to withdraw forces from Malta and Italian territories in order to intervene in the Balkans. The German invasion of Yugoslavia and the Battle of Greece were both amongst the many Balkan conflicts the Germans took part in. These certain wars had to be dealt with immediately so the German army could be primarily focused on the Soviet Union in June. Subsequently, leadership of the Mediterranean conflicts, such as those for Malta and Africa, were given back to Mussolini, most importantly, the Battle of Greece. Malta was left in an extremely poor state following the bombardment via Italian Navy and Air Forces. Maintenance was extremely hard as they lacked most parts old or new. With the Luftwaffe slowly pulling out the airspace, more and more RAF aircrafts were able to get to Malta, but this didn't affect the hardship of supplying Malta. Furthermore, they lacked equipment. Basic tools such as hammers, anywhere to store it, and the airports were far too small for such a war. Rommel's army was closing in on Alexandria and the Suez Canal in a bid for a strategic advantage in case the Germans decided on returning to the Mediterranean. It would also be viable in preventing the flow of Allied supplies to Malta, Gibraltar, and Egypt. After heavy thought, the British commanders decided to prevent Rommel's breakthrough by utilizing the RAF to strike Axis supply lines in Africa. Lloyd's bombers and a small number of submarines managed to occupy German supply lines into the autumn. Consequently, the surface fleets decided to return to Malta to support the offensive. The reinforcement of Malta, July to September 1941. Operation Substance in July 1941 saw supplies such as 60 bombers, 120 Hurricanes, spare parts, and 65,000 tons of equipment was successfully brought to Malta, with 85,000 tons coming in September. Defenses were built for air bases along with many Maltese men drafted into the war to increase manpower. Underground shelters were also built with the fear of the return of the Luftwaffe. However, on the 26th of July, it would be Italy to strike first with a fast attack craft of the infamous Italian Decima Flottiglia MAS unit. The attack didn't last long as it was detected early by a British radar, and coastal artillery of the reinforced Fort St. Elmo quickly responded. The skirmish resulted in 15 casualties and 18 more Italian pilots captured.